Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I'm just back from the Powell family Vegas vacation. And man, I need a vacation from this vacation. We did so much, we made so many memories, and we have no need to head back to Vegas for a long, long time. I will say, the highlights of our trip were the backstage tour of the Love Show and the Michael Jackson 1 show that Marco DeSanti arranged for us. Thank you so much, Marco. Cirque really knows how to entertain, and if you have a chance to see either of those shows, I highly recommend it. I mean, they kept the 13-year-old's attention for an hour and a half, and he left stoked on the whole show. That's a hard thing to do. The other highlights were the roller coaster at the New York, the pools, and the fat Elvis that we saw riding a rascal scooter on the strip. This dude was getting within inches of people and scaring the living shit out of them with his scooter. And then when the folks were good and annoyed, he started throwing bang snaps at people. It was amazing. The lowlights of the trip were the zip line at the Fremont Street Experience. What looked like a really cool thing ended up costing $150 for 2 people, and it was the lamest experience ever. Jumping on a trampoline is more exciting than the zip lines at the Fremont Experience, so if you're considering it, don't do it. Our hotel was also pretty shitty, and when I say that, I mean it. We stayed at the Paris Hotel and Casino, and one morning, I'm walking down the hallway to my room, and there was a pillow literally covered in shit in the hallway for all to see. It was gross, and while the casino area of the Paris was cool, the rooms were pretty run down. But that's okay, we didn't stay in the room that much. Over the 4 days we were in Vegas, we walked 70 miles, and we hit a shit ton of casinos. Here's the Powell family list: Mandalay Bay, Horseshoe, Flamingo, Excalibur, Luxor, Paris, Caesars, Bellagio, Mirage, Cosmopolitan, Treasure Island, Venetian, Palazzo, Golden Nugget, Binion's, Fremont, Planet Hollywood, and the Tropicana. We went everywhere. And to top everything off, I was able to connect with an old high school friend that I hadn't seen in about 20 years. Thanks for lunch, Carrie Spooner. Glad you haven't changed since the 90s, and it was cool to see you so successful in Vegas. I also want to thank Josh Lubeck, who continues to hook me up with Nema vitamins. I doubled up on the Nema in Vegas, and I needed that energy. So thank you, Josh. My final thank you here is to the Summit at Snoqualmie. They're Seattle's home mountain and a place that I love to go so much that I'll be there tomorrow. If you're in the market for a season pass, well, you already missed out on spring pricing, but that's okay. Just make sure you don't miss out on getting a pass for next season. The numbers are limited and you're going to be sorry if you don't have a pass to the mountain that's 40 minutes away from our city. So be sure you get on that one. That's enough about me talking about what I'm doing. It's time for part 2 with Chris Rubens. We talk about filming, JP Auclair, his carbon footprint reduction, and a whole bunch more. I'm not going to spoil any of it for you. Before we get into it, I will ask you to tell a friend about the show, and please review me wherever you listen. This really does help the show grow, and the show's free, so this is all I ask of you. Actually, it's not. I'm going to ask you one more thing. I want you to support my amazing sponsors who make this thing happen. They are Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Elon Skis, Rollerblade, Stanley, and Best Day Brewing. Now, it's time for part 2 with Chris Rubens. The last podcast, we discussed the skinny dipping tradition that you started with the Mountain Collective. And traditions like skinny dipping are pretty fun, but pranks happen all the time on ski trips, and there's a lot of fucking with people on ski trips. What's the best prank that you've pulled on someone else, and what's the best prank that's been pulled on you?
I mean, I will say, like, one of the funnier, I don't know if it's a prank, but, you know, in the height of the icing games, I'm sure people still do it, but I never really subscribed to it, and we were doing a big long trip up to Stewart, BC with Cody Townsend and Jeff Thomas, and they were like right into it. We got in the car at the start of like a 3-day road trip, and they're like icing each other, and I'm like, I'm not playing this game or whatever, and open the glove box and reach inside, and I'm like, I'm not doing this. And they're like, well, if you don't do it, you don't get to play the game. And I'm like, perfect, that sounds great. Like, put a Pilsner in there, I'm totally happy, but I'm not down with the icing, you know?
And you didn't do it?
I didn't do it, yeah, and then I didn't have to do it. Like, it kind of ruined the game for the trip, but I was quite proud of myself, actually.
So you pretty much took a prank and ruined it for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. But that was just such a bad prank in my book. I watched that game ruin people's nights. You know, it's just like this dose of disgusting sugar. Like, a shotgun of beer, like, bring it on. I'll do it any day of the week. But yeah, I was never, like, let down with that, that's for sure.
I always felt like when it was very calculated and done smart, like when someone would ship me a box and I'd have to open a box within a box and then there'd be an ice in there. I always thought that was pretty clever, given I'd never do it because they weren't there in person. But yeah, I don't really play that game. And I don't play the game either when people come up to me with shots and like, hey, we're all taking shots. I just don't do that because I know my limits. And when I throw a shot into the mix of anything, it really just ruins me for the night. Have you ever pulled a prank on other people that's just laugh out loud funny? Or is that not your style?
Yeah, I either have a poor memory or it's not my style. So it's probably a combination of both. But yeah, I'm just more of like a casual joker, I guess.
And when you say poor memory, you're one of those dudes who'll crush beers more so than you're a cloud of smoke type guy, right?
Yeah, I like beer. And I mean, back in the day, we definitely smoked our fair amount of weed. But these days, there's not a lot of that going on, that's for sure.
Gotcha. So when we left off in part 1, we were talking about your beginnings with Matchstick. And your first stint with them, you did 3 movies, which is a dream for any pro, especially an up-and-coming pro like yourself, and especially at that time when the mega movies were all that mattered. And Matchstick had some rock stars at that point when you started. When you think about those early trips, what MSP athletes did you get to travel with, and who left a big impression on you?
Honestly, like all of them, like some of them you went on trips with. It was super interesting for me because it was like, I grew up watching these movies, watching ABMA, like Tanner Hall, Davenport, Douglas. They were my idols, and then all of a sudden you're like doing trips with them and like they're your idols still, but you're also basically working with them. And like it became like really obvious to me very quickly that every kind of superstar athlete that you met, it was very obvious why they were who they were, not just because of their skiing, just their general persona. They absolutely loved skiing. They were super professional. And to me, it was like a big inspiration and a huge help of how to kind of present yourself as like an actual professional skier.
And when you think about that, you had the McConkeys of the world who were like really funny and bubbling with personality. Seth, whose personality really wasn't there as much. He was more the quiet guy, but that's how he was marketed, is like the punk rock quiet guy. But when you think about you and your career, did anybody ever try to market you in a certain way, or was it just like Chris Rubens, the skier?
I don't know if they tried to market me in a certain way, but I certainly, I feel like when you're younger, you're like trying to be one of those people that you like looking up to. And then at some point something switches and you're like, well, not just be me. And that's kind of when things start working. Instead of like trying to be someone else, you just like do you. And you're like, well, you either like me or you don't, like not, you don't want to be an asshole, obviously, but just like having your own touch on skiing showcased, which I think is the beauty about skiing, is like it's all the same, but everybody looks at it slightly different, so putting your own little shine on it. And that really came to light, I feel like, for me, and it's kind of a good segue from like the Matchstick into the Solomon TVs. But that really started with the Matchstick, because the original Solomon TVs, we were taking all the footage, or Douglas was taking all the footage that hit the floor from these trips, which was a lot, and doing something with it, making these little ski edits, and that's how it all started.
So that's where he got his start, his pivot really from pro skier to behind the lens, and he has a long career with that. But you do 3 movies with MSP, and in what would be year 4 with them, you don't shoot with them. And is it something that it doesn't get funded, or they move in a different direction, or were you hurt, or do you have something else lined up? What's the reason for not filming with a company that you've already built a good rapport with?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly enough, it's like kind of a convoluted story, but yeah, it was a bit challenging to get paid on time, and it can still be to this day.
For Matchstick or for you?
For me, from sponsors, it's not an uncommon thing in the industry, I would say. Certain people are better at paying than others, and anyways, that particular year, I bought a house with a girl and started a bed and breakfast in Revelstoke, like right at the start of when the ski hill started. And typical Reno, like overextended ourselves, got into debt, and normally through the ski season, I would just use my credit card before I'd get paid and kind of like bounce around on a credit card until it finally showed up. And that's kind of how it was working at that point. And that year, that wasn't an option for me. So I actually like totally missed out on the trips.
That has to be so frustrating for you when you've created a spot for yourself within the Matchstick crew and they expect you to be there. And then the fact that you have this money coming in, but it hasn't come on time, that affects your career and you can't go film and do what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, totally. I'm kind of like I'm a bit of a believer in kind of like fate and destiny. And so that year I didn't have any money. I couldn't travel. My snowmobile lit on fire, had to fix that, and then finally got it fixed. And then I think like 3 days later, I kind of tweaked my knee, and that was like getting towards the end of the season. And it was just like, okay, I get it. This season's not for me. And you know, I've had that in so many different years over the years. Like currently right now, I'm having a year where it's just like, it's not really working out, you know, like you're trying to do these things and you just kind of keep hitting walls and you keep trying, but sometimes maybe focus on other things and there's going to be lots of other seasons, you know? So I think that season in particular was a really big learnable for me of like not pushing it. And then that summer we went with Solomon TV and the Sherpas. We went down to the volcano in Chile, and it was my 25th birthday, and just had this epic trip where I'd been kind of bumming on skiing and it wasn't going well, and it just cracked me open and was like, oh yeah, I'm having so much fun and this is like sweet and I want to do this, you know?
Yeah, so I mean, it makes me think about two different things. We're going to talk about the Sherpas, but first I have to say, is it something where when that money doesn't come in from sponsors right away, where you're kind of new and you can't really start bitching at people saying, hey, I need this money really quick, because you don't want to piss them off and not have them be in your corner for the rest of your career. So you kind of just take it and you know it's coming eventually and you just deal with that?
Well, yeah, I may or may not have pissed off a few people that year for sure. Yeah, I don't know. I've always done other things on the business side of things, not just skiing. You know, I did a lot of construction and currently run a farm. So it's like, you know, I've been working for myself for the last like 14 years or something like that. So it's like one of those things when you're not getting paid, it's like pretty frustrating. And definitely now I don't really have a lot of patience for it. But also like now, you know, that you're a bit more financially stable and it doesn't hurt you as much as it did in the past or whatever. But, you know, still like racking up credit card debt is as a young budding pro skier, you know, like people really think that you've got it all dialed, but they don't see the credit card debt. They don't see you busting ass like all summer to pay for your winters. Generally, I mean, other than the few total superstars that hit it, most people have other jobs and are hustling other things to make it work in the winter.
Yeah. Well, now I'm going to jump into the Sherpas because I think you filmed with them for their Avi education movie, The Fine Line. But when you film for the All I Can year, and that's like the biggest movie in maybe not the history of ski movies, but it was fucking huge and it blew everyone's mind. And it was a totally refreshing way to see a ski movie. But the one thing I noticed about the Sherpas was I never really think about nationality when I think of ski movies, but the cast and crew for All I Can, minus the two women that were in the movie, it's all Canadian. Did you guys realize that at the time?
No, not really. I mean, I think it just kind of happened organically. I mean, I grew up in Calgary. They grew up in Calgary. I didn't know them in Calgary, but I met Crosland really early in my career. I was doing a TV show called Ride Guide, and he was shooting for that. So we met super early on. But yeah, I think it's just part of the nature of, you know, like at that time, they were moving to Whistler, and that was really the epicenter of free skiing then. And so they pulled a lot of talent from that area. And then they were old Rockies boys, so they pulled a lot of talent from that. And yeah, that's like movie making bliss. You know, you haven't had a hit yet and you're working your way up. And so you're just like stoked. It was just like fun and stoked and pretty cool. And yeah, pretty cool to see so many Canadians in there for sure.
And when you're working on a project that's directed by Dave Mossop, Eric Crossland, and JP Auclair, are things totally different vibe-wise than what's going on with MSP? And can you describe the differences?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the biggest difference for them is that they went to film school, like Mossop and Crossland, they went to film school. So you would see like a lot more direction when it came to shots and going out there on trips. I mean, some trips it was like, okay, this is just like a high action trip. Let's like go get it. But there was always something going on in the background of having to do this. Like when we shot Into the Mine, we had those like crazy circle spinning things. There's always something interesting and they're trying to do transition shots. And the biggest difference is you're going out there to like get something quite specific because they have the shot list all written out. Whereas your standard ski porn's like matchstick and blank and whatever. It's like you're just out there to get action. That's kind of about it.
The movie wins so many awards. When that happens, does that shine a bright light on everyone involved with the movie after it's released? Like, all of your sponsors are shitting your pants because you're a part of this movie that everyone's talking about?
Yeah, I don't know about that. And that's such an interesting concept, you know? It's like, you know, I've won a few Powder of the Year awards and been part of the movie of the year. And I feel like the people that are part of it that sponsored the movie are like super stoked. But yeah, I don't know if they're like, oh yeah, he was a part of it, we're going to give him a raise next year or anything like that. I think people are just like want to be part of a really good movie, I think is like more than anything. And then you have that to like showcase for a lot longer. I really think because I've been fortunate to have such a long career, it's like those pieces, when you look back on them, they just get so much more special because the older you get, the harder it is to do, you know, to come up with these original ideas and totally nail the concept. I mean, I think Into the Mind is a perfect example of that. You know, it's the second big film comes out and didn't totally nail it. Whereas All I Can to some degree felt easier, you know, there was less pressure and Into the Mind was way more thought out and all that. So yeah, I've always wondered that about sponsors and stuff like that, how much weight they put in that sort of thing.
How about on the other side with the awards for you? Do the awards mean that much to you, or is it just like on to the next movie and the awards mean more for the cinematographers and people involved in the back end?
It's definitely nice for sure to win an award, but I'm pretty picky when it comes to movies. And to be honest, it doesn't even have to be a movie. If we put a 5-minute segment together, I'm pretty stoked on that. Like the last Matchstick production thing I did, we went to Kane and put this really cool edit together, and I was just stoked on that, and people really liked it. And I just like seeing the storytelling and seeing stories come to life and then combining that with good skiing, and that's totally my jam.
With the Sherpas, you get to work with JP Auclair, arguably one of the most important skiers of our time. Do you get to know him well?
Yeah, I didn't get to work with him super closely. Like, I mean, definitely know of him, but I mean, he was just such a charismatic and relaxed, you know, like he brought a really relaxed, like everything's going to be okay vibe to everything, especially when it's like total chaos. And he was just the happy go lucky, like, let's go do it. Yeah, this is awesome. You know, the classic line of like, I don't think we need to do less, we need to do more. And that was very much how that guy lived his life. You know, it was a super inspiring and awesome guy to meet.
He passes away in 2014. It's a huge loss for the industry and for so many people. And death is never easy, but it's something that you experienced a lot over the years. And how many friends of yours do you think you've lost in the mountains?
Yeah, you know what? I've been somewhat fortunate when it comes to that. I mean, JP and Andreas, that was definitely a tough one. And then Dave Treadway,
yeah,
that was a really tough one. You know, everyone hits differently, partly where you are in your life. I think how close you were to them. You know, I had done a lot of trips with friends and more than JP, but like I never really let myself get too close to him. But the whole thing's really sad and it brings you home and you really see the impact that's brought to their families, to their friends. And that's like a really hard thing to process. I find myself these days more and more like when that happens, I really try to sit back and really let myself feel that, just to remind myself of the consequences that you're making with each decision out there. You know, you don't want to give it up, but you definitely are not on any sort of death wish. That's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, with what you're doing, while it's fun, there's a ton of risk. And for some reason, I guess this is going to be me thinking aloud for a second, but I believe people take a lot more risk when they're younger and then they start reeling it in when they're in their mid to late 30s. Like something changes in people's brains, or at least that happened to me. And I feel like that's happened to a lot of people that I know. Have you experienced that?
Yeah. I mean, 100%. I mean, you just see more shit. You see the consequences. You're part of rescues. You have friends die. Like it's way more in your face. And you kind of realize that. I mean, I think the thing that I've always done fairly well and that I continue to like do really good, and I'm proud to do it, is that I'm really good at assessing conditions. And so I ended up doing a lot of travel shooting. And so you go somewhere for 2 weeks and you kind of have to come back for the segment. And so you go there and it's like shitty avalanche conditions. And it's really just asking about what you can do. It's like, okay, well, today we can go do like one turn wonders in the trees and not be at risk. And it's not going to be like the epic segment, but we're going to get something, you know, like people are paying us to be here. And then on the flip side of that is like, you're biding your time. And then it's like, all right, like all the stars aligned. It's like Bluebird. we have had no wind, we've been out for a couple of days, we're feeling real good about the snowpack, it's like, okay, like let's hit it, and then my risk tolerance goes way up.
Just because you live so much and understand conditions.
Yeah, those are the days I live for. And yes, it's risky, and yes, I might get hurt, but it's not being dumb, I think, is the big thing. I can't have a reckless, like, oh, that was really stupid. Why didn't we see this? Why didn't we see that? I'm like too far past that. Like if I'm out there and I'm totally aware of them, the mountains are a very dangerous place, and I get hurt and I'm doing everything right, then that's a risk that I'm totally willing to take. But I'm definitely not willing to take those reckless, stupid risks anymore.
So it's a theory that seems to hold water, that you're older, you're going to take less risk because you're smarter and you're more educated. But when I think of all the people that die in the mountains, most of them are older, given Kyle Smain was pretty young. And so is Dave Treadway. But it seems like most people are 30 and older that go. So it's like, there goes that whole theory that we talked about, because you say you're not reckless and you don't want to do something dumb. But then you look how Coombs went and how all these educated, smart people just make a mistake. And, I don't know where I'm going with it, but I want to think that as people get older, they'll get smarter, but maybe that's just a theory.
I mean, the whole thing is educated guesses, right? And there's also an element, like the more educated you get in the mountains, the more you can you're like, oh, well, like it's like this, but like I know the zone, like it'll be okay. And then you have that kind of familiarization of terrain heuristic that like will totally get you, like you're not without risk. And at the end of the day, one of the things that I think about quite a bit is it's a numbers game. The more exposure you have, the more risk you have. So, it can come back to bite you. But yeah, just staying totally focused on it and never losing that. But I mean, for example, this year we had terrible avalanche conditions for the start. Honestly, I was went cross country skiing. I mean, I just had a kid too. So I'm like,
extra safe?
Not extra safe. You just really want to keep your brownies close and burn them when you need to. And when it's not good, you're like, okay, well, I'll just step out for an hour and be home and be present and wait until it gets good. And you just get more and more patient at waiting. And then the other thing I was just going to touch on was that the other thing about when you get older, and part of the reason I think that you stop taking risks as much is your head's not in the snowpack as much, I think, as it was in some years, when all you're doing is skiing all the time, you're out there all the time, you know exactly what's going on with the snow, you're super in tune. And the older you get, you're getting pulled this way. Like a sponsor wants you to go down to this place where the snow's not good. And then you're traveling here and traveling there. And then you come back and you've got some life stuff to deal with and your head's just not in it. And then the forecast goes blue and you're up there and you're like, whoa, I'm not really totally in, So those are factors of getting older, you get busier.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm stoked that Rollerblade is back as a sponsor. I have a long history with inline skates, and out of all the skates I've tried, nothing compares to the quality and support of a Rollerblade inline skate. And the reason I feel this way is because of the support the skates offer. Whether you're skating one of their hard boot models that offers maximum support, or one of their soft boot models that offer support where you need it, you're going to find that Rollerblade branded skates don't get soft and overflex like the competition. And that's something that you can see and feel while you're skating. This is the brand that invented the sport, and the products they make are second to none. Ski season may be coming to an end, but that's no excuse to get out of ski shape. Inline skating is the only sport that will keep you there, and it doesn't matter how much you ride your $10,000 bike or how much you run, nothing gets or keeps you in ski shape like inline skating. And the best way to do that is to pick up a pair of Rollerblade inline skates and download the Rollerblade Ski to Skate app, which has a training program that'll keep you at your best. You can find out about all things Rollerblade and their app over at rollerblade.com. Next up, it's a place that you can get your Rollerblade branded inline skates and your Elon skis. I'm talking about Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. The best online shopping experience in snow, in my opinion. Why are they so great? Because Peter Glenn does it all. Online, they have the best deals on the internet, and they offer free shipping on orders over $50, a no-hassle return policy that makes things easy to send back if you have to, and that's really important to me. You don't want to be hassled when you're returning a product. And what separates Peter Glenn from those internet-driven companies looking for the biggest profits is that Peter Glenn is really a mom-and-pop retail establishment, and they've been getting people out on snow for over 65 years. And when you're in their stores, you're going to find all the brands, all the products, and a lot of passionate, knowledgeable people who want to help get you dialed in for your next adventure. On top of that, Peter Glenn's going to price match. If you find what you want at another reputable website or store for a lower price, let the good folks know at Peter Glenn and they're going to match that price. So please do that for me, and before you look elsewhere to outfit your adventure, head on over to peterglenn.com. My final sponsor this round is Elan Skis. And if you haven't noticed, Elan is building a cult following here in the States on the basis of their Ripstick line. I personally ski on the Ripsticks 96 Black Edition and the Ripsticks 106, and I will tell you that I noticed a difference in my skiing on day one. It's amazing how light and playful these skis can be while also remaining rock solid in the turn and at high speeds. It's the quality that I've come to expect from skis built in the Slovenian Alps. But what really separates Elan from its competition is their factory. They built a solar power plant on top of their state-of-the-art building, and this, combined with independence from fossil fuels, will provide a carbon sink as powerful as 15,000 trees on an annual basis. While a lot of brands are saying they are making a difference when it comes to the environment, Elan is really putting their money where their mouth is. To find out more about all things Elan, head on over to elanskis.com. So I'm going to jump back to filming because we could talk so much about filming. I mean, you shot with MSP. Then you worked with Kai Peterson and his masterpiece Numinous. You did comedy with Katie Burrell. You consistently put shit out with the Blank Collective. You're a fixture with Mike Douglas and Solomon TV. And while everyone is talented, if you had to pick out 1 year of filming and traveling and producing a movie, what was your personal favorite? Like which season, filmmaking crew, and why?
Oh, wow. That's so tough. I don't know if I could actually answer that. I mean, it's all so similar. I mean, the last couple of years with the Blank Collective was really fun, especially that COVID year when we actually did end up winning Movie of the Year that year. We had really good stability and we had a really tight crew. And the Blank Collective crew is like a bit different. It was more of a shoestring budget and we were really doing it ourselves. There was no guides, and like, if you were the first down on your line, you would jump behind the camera and shoot second angle. And it was just, we had a really good jiving team and never taking things too seriously. Like I really enjoyed that. Yeah, we were meshing super well together, and skiing. I mean, we skied some really awesome stuff those last couple of years. And it was because you're feeling comfortable with your buddies. That's another thing. You're out there and you're like, all right, this guy, if I go down, he's saving my life and I'm saving his life. So when you're really jiving in that, then you feel really comfortable pushing it. So, yeah, I mean, that was the most recent.
I have a question about the Blank Collective crew, and it's kind of a controversial one. But I interviewed Casey Dean a while ago, and he was talking about the first movie and the founding of the Blank Collective. I think the 86 was the first movie. You were a part of that. Casey had kind of said that he was a founding member of the Blank Collective, and then he didn't really know what happened, but he was kicked out or something like that. Do you have any idea of what happened to him and that crew?
Yeah, that was definitely before my time. I think you'd have to get Godboo on the podcast and get the drama going. But yeah, I kind of came in after all that, and it was like definitely like a very much a Alexi and Solomon thing at that point. But yeah, I mean, I do believe it all.
He was involved in the beginning, and somehow he's not anymore, and I should talk to Alexi to figure it out.
Totally. I mean, yeah, there's definitely some drama when it comes to ski filming. There's no doubt about that.
Well, I'm going to talk about something that isn't drama, that maybe creates a whole bunch of drama within your whole life and changes your whole life. This is the project that gives your life meaning, and you've done a ton with Solomon TV over the years, and the project that had the biggest impact on your life was Guilt Trip. You head to Greenland with Mike Douglas and a wacky climate scientist named Alan. And what was the goal of that trip?
That was definitely the trip that changed my life more than anything else, to be honest. So the goal of the trip was we went to Greenland, and then to alleviate our carbon footprint guilt of flying to Greenland to go ski gnarly peaks, we brought a climate scientist along, and it wasn't just any climate scientist. It was like the biggest British character you can imagine, Alan Hubbard. So the thing was, if you watch the movie on Solomon TV, like, we didn't try to pretend like we were saving the world or anything. We kind of did it in a very like, this is what we're doing, like, and having that discussion, which I've always really enjoyed, that transparency when it comes to like anything climate.
It was a ski trip with some science involved.
Yeah, exactly. And the science was actually super cool. I think we actually got more out of it than we thought. But we're on a glacier for 14 days and we're talking about climate change. And like, it was like very much like I wasn't a climate denier by any means before that, but it always just seemed like this big insurmountable problem for me that I couldn't really do anything about it. And then we took it on tour and we did a bunch of stops. We did like Toronto, New York, and there was a lot of people there that didn't necessarily know much about mountains or anything like that. And they're like, wow, you guys are seeing this? Like, what are you doing about it?
That's what makes you change, right? It's more not the trip, but the people asking you what you're doing about it. And then you're like,
Totally. And I was totally prepared for these questions and being put on stage and all that. But I'm on stage and you're like, oh, well, we made this movie, like pretty cool, right? Ha ha ha. And right around that time, Greg was also kind of going down the rabbit hole and his carbon footprint too. And so you go down this rabbit hole of doom and gloom and all that stuff. And then as you start climbing out of it and realizing that crawling under a rock isn't going to help anybody, you start realizing the changes that you can make. And then at that point in my career, I had a bunch of followers and had a bit of notoriety. And I was like, well, I can use my voice and that's what I'm going to do. And so I started making changes.
When you start making changes, do you start slow? Like first you start running your truck on veggie oil, then you start ski touring and stop using your sled and helicopters, and then it evolves to the point where you're a vegetarian? Does that all kind of just happen in steps?
Like right off the bat, it was switching to veggie, eating vegetarian. From the research I did, it was like the most tangible thing that I could do and actually had like a huge impact. And I was a big meat eater. I ate meat 3 times a day. Knew that it wasn't necessarily good for me, but I was definitely of like the mindset, like if it doesn't have meat in it, it's not going to fill me up. So did that right off the bat. And then previous to that, I think the guilt trip year, I'd done like 26 flights around the world, which is actually, it's a lot, but not a lot compared to a lot of people I know at this stage. So the next year, and pretty much to this day, I'm down to like basically one international trip a year that is like kind of part of your job. I can say no to a lot of things, but there's definitely some things that are just like non-negotiable if you want to be a sponsored skier.
Sure.
But the big thing for me and the whole point that I like try to portray now is I switched to veggie, and for a while there, you're kind of like, yeah, I don't know about this. And then you're like, well, really don't feel that different. And then, a few months in, you're like, I think I actually feel kind of better. And then for me, my body felt way better. And the big thing was taking this total negative thing of climate change and putting a positive spin on it for me. And so instead of being discouraged, humans don't do good with criticism. They don't do good with negativity. And so as soon as you make something positive, you're like, okay, cool. Like, what else can I do? So it's been like a real big snowball effect from just make those 2 changes.
So you make those 2 changes, and I don't know if you're telling people online, but eventually it's going to come out in your social, I would think, and just people are going to figure it out. And you mentioned negativity, and when you throw positivity out there, we're talking about the internet, and there's always a fucking asshole who's just going to tear you apart, I would think. And you are traveling the world at different times. I mean, it's part of your job, and it's not like you're quitting your job to reduce your carbon footprint. It's like you're doing everything you can to minimize your carbon footprint, but you're still a pro skier and you're still going to do stuff. Do you hear a lot of shit online from just those assholes?
Yeah, 100%.
How do you deal with those people?
You know what? I mean, some of them, they just have to say their point, and whatever you say doesn't matter. So there's not even a point to talking to them. That's their decision, and that's fine. But personally, I go on the conversation route and try and engage with people. I mean, there's been a few people that work in oil and gas, and they send me links. I'll look at them, like business sustainability reports, and I just basically try and educate myself on the other side of things too. The more educated you are on the topic, the more you can have these conversations and then try and steer them. There's so much false information out there. You're like, no, that's not actually true. Like, check out this study and here you go. But I think just like being transparent and not pretending, you can't be greenwashing, like I think we're getting to the end of that right now, whereas like you're seeing companies start these greenwashing campaigns and it's not going to fly.
People see through it.
Yeah, it's super easy. And the other side of that is we live in a fossil fuel based society. We are not going to be perfect overnight, but like we need to start getting better. And the only way to start getting better is to start. And the one line that I always steal from Greg Hill is when you're climbing mountains, if you stand at the bottom of like a 3,000 meter mountain and you look at the summit and you're like, there's no fucking way I can climb up there. Like, that's so far. But if you're like, hey, like, let's go for an hour and take a snack. And then you like go for an hour, take a snack, and you do that 2 or 3 times. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, the summit's right there, you know? And it's like all of a sudden it becomes way smaller of a problem when you break it down into these little things. And that's the exact approach, you know, you just have to start. And are all the solutions out there right now? No, not all the solutions out there. Are the solutions out there perfect? Far from it. But, you know, we need to start going down this way of trying to get better. It's the only way that it works.
And you brought up Greg Hill, and Greg is someone who's examining his carbon footprint at the same time you're examining yours. And you guys are tight, good friends as well. And with the Curve of Time movie, it's like a volcano ski trip that's all in electric vehicles and skinning up. And it's kind of an experiment to see if you can do it. How does the whole idea come together? Is it just you and him shooting the shit one day, and then you're like, fuck it, let's just do this thing?
Well, the idea started at something very different and ended up in Curve of Time. It actually started with like it was going to be the next step from Guilt Trip. That was like the progression. That was the idea. And so the first trip we did, which is in the movie but isn't really highlighted, is we did like a carbon neutral ski traverse just south of Revelstoke and then back to Revelstoke.
Yeah.
So we biked from our houses and then we managed to hitchhike down there with someone that was already heading down there. And then we headed into the Monashee Mountains for 10 days and walked back to Revelstoke. And we'd been talking about this all year. We were like super psyched. We had huge bags, obviously, but then we were in good shape. And we had these, we called them attack bags. We had these little bags that we were just going to throw our Avi gear in. And like when we were going, like walking along the traverse and we saw a sick line that we wanted to hit, we'd be like, attack.
Okay.
And we'd go up and ski that. But it turns out that Greg got super sick the first day. And he was sick for basically 2/3 of the trip, like super bad diarrhea, low energy. It was basically looked like he was like walking up an 8,000 meter peak.
Okay.
For most of the trip. And I broke more trail for him than I ever have because I don't normally break a lot of trail for him.
He's a machine.
He's a total machine.
Like 2 Mill Hill, right?
Oh yeah, he's one of the fittest guys I know, that's for sure. And then we had this like awesome weather window that completely evaporated and the weather sucked and it was just a total struggle fest the whole time. We lost a drone, all these things. And I mean, the irony of it, like the only thing that we like really skied was just on the home mountain Begbie, which we can hit in a day from our house. And we ended up camping there for like an extra night just because that's when the weather finally got good. So it was a bit of a disappointment. And that was the big trip. And then he was getting an electric car and it hadn't come in yet, but he wanted to really do this electric road trip to ski the volcanoes. And I was the only one dumb enough to sign up for it. I was like, that sounds awesome. But he rented a Nissan Leaf, which
barely fits your skis,
has a 150 kilometer range at best, is basically a city commuter. And we started at Mount Baker. There's an Arc'teryx thing that we hopped on to summit that. And we really didn't have a plan. We're like, we have no idea if this is going to work. And it came pretty clear, pretty quick that it was totally doable. And it took the mountains into the car because it required quite a bit of planning and driving and strategy on how you moved around with that little of range and still like managing to do that. But we ended up, I think we were gone for 2 weeks. We did like 4,000 kilometers in the car and we summited most of the big volcanoes. And it was like really, really fun. Just like the whole experience was taking what you love doing and doing it slightly different. And it just was super exciting to us because it's like, okay, this is the same thing we always do, but we're doing it better now.
It's almost adding a game to it too, because with your range, I mean, anytime you turn on the AC, you have less time in that car, or anytime you turn on the radio, you have less time in that car. So you're constantly playing a game of chess, I would think, with the vehicle and the range as well.
No, exactly. And if you're like a mountain person, I mean, and Greg, he's the best at it. He just looks at everything in numbers. Like whenever he's hiking up, he's like, okay, I'm going to hike for 400 meters. It's going to take me X amount of time. And then I'm going to have a snack and then I'm going to go do this and that, it's all numbers to him. So he was like totally into it, obviously. And then, yeah, it's just like, to us, it made driving more fun. Cause like if you're just driving the gas vehicle, you're like driving around, you can just stop at a gas station wherever you want. I mean, the only time you like really have to think about it is like when you go somewhere super remote and there's no gas stations and you're like, oh, maybe I should gas up before I go there, Yeah, it just totally changed the whole experience.
So that worked back then with a Leaf, which I'm not going to call a piece of shit electric car, but your Leaf from back then compared to a Leaf even today, or any of the new modern electric cars, it's got to be so much easier to do that trip these days, and you can do so much more with a 400-mile range now.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the big caveat with that is there's a price tag that's associated with these new vehicles, Like, I don't personally own an electric vehicle. I would love one, but I also don't have like $60,000 to $100,000 to shell out on a vehicle,
Yeah, no, I'm in the same boat.
But they're coming, It's like the cheaper vehicles are coming, and they're so fun to drive. They're wicked fast, and yeah, it's just a totally different experience.
It's time for my final round of sponsors, and I'm going to start things off with Best Day Brewing. Over the years, sure, I've enjoyed drinking beer, maybe a little too much sometimes. I mean, once it hits your lips, it tastes so good. But these days, I have so much to do, and I need a beer that doesn't slow me down. That's where Best Day comes into my life. While I still drink alcoholic beer, I'm finding that most days I just want the IPA flavor and not the alcohol. And with Best Day, I found that their hazy IPA and their Kolsch have just as much, if not more, flavor than the alcoholic versions. And I've done blind taste tests on my friends. None of them knew the difference when I handed them a pint of Best Day. And after we had 3 or 4 beers at my taste test, all my friends were psyched when I let them know that they weren't consuming alcohol and everyone could drive home. While I'm not asking you to quit drinking, I know that most of us would be better off slowing down, and Best Day is the perfect choice for doing that. So next time you're at the store, please pick up a 6-pack of Best Day and support the beer that supports me. And if you can't find Best Day at your local grocer, head on over to bestday.com, and orders over $50 get free shipping. My final sponsor is a brand that you should pour your Best Day brewing in. I'm talking about Stanley, another iconic Seattle brand that has been ahead of the curve since 1913. While we all know Stanley for creating that iconic green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot all day long, they still do that and a lot more these days. They're still all about adventure. They're still all about keeping your beverages hotter or colder than any other product ever created. And I know this because I've been given just about every water bottle on the planet, and nothing comes close to what I found in Stanley. And Stanley has always been the right choice when it comes to the planet. If you're still using single-use plastics for your beverages, it's time to make a change. And I'm making it easier than ever to do that. You're going to save 30% on all your Stanley products when you head on over to stanley1913.com and go shopping. I highly recommend picking up a water bottle and a set of pint glasses. When you check out, enter the code DRINKFAST, that's all lowercase, all one word, and you're going to save 30%, and that's the best deal you're going to find anywhere on Stanley products. So those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. Now I'm going to take you to an experience that you're familiar with. You're taking people out in the mountains, and I guess you're actually not familiar with this experience at all, to tell you the truth, because it's 2019. You're going out in the backcountry with Noah Morrison. And I think the premise behind this piece is that you're going to take this comp kid and you're going to show him the real shit in the backcountry, which is a pretty cool idea. And you seem pretty confident with the conditions. You pretty much are like, hey, Noah, send it. Things are good, right? That's kind of how everything felt to you in the beginning.
Yeah, totally. It was like a forecast magazine shoot that we were doing, and he was going to show me his backyard, which is Vernon, the Silver Star crew, like total jib terrain park. And then I was showing him my side of it, the backcountry skiing. And so that winter, I'd spent a lot of time in Revelstoke, so I was feeling like really good about the snowpack. I had my head in it a lot. We spent, I think it was 1 or 2 days before in some trees, just shooting around and all that. And then it went blue, and I knew that it was early season. I can't remember if it was January or December or something like that, but it was early season. I knew I was pushing it, but I also was like feeling pretty good about it. And so we did a bunch of like warm-up lines that day, just like kind of poking around and feeling the snow. And there was a lot of people in the area too doing the same thing, and everything felt good. And then, yeah, like, I totally put him on that line. He wouldn't have been there without me. And unfortunately went for a tumble and then went for a slide. And, I've been doing this for 20 years, and that's the one and only time that I've actually had to take my avalanche transceiver out and start searching for someone.
And you could see in the video that your training took over and you were able to find him and everything kind of went as planned and everything was okay. But when I think about it, like, this is a park kid, and the chances of him landing anything first try in powder aren't very good. I mean, you probably remember your first time trying to land shit in powder, and it creates a lot of cartwheeling per se. I think we used to call it tomahawking, but I don't even know if that's right anymore. So I said it. I don't know if I'll keep it in the podcast. But either way, when you see everything ripped out, you go down and you get him out. But when you think back to that day, would you have done anything differently, or still were all the signs like everything was safe and it was just the fact that he tumbled that thing got ripped out?
There was a good learnable there. I mean, for sure, my ego of wanting to show my home resort, like I'm super proud of where I live and I would really like showcasing it to people. There's definitely that side of it going on. And then, yeah, I underestimated that. I mean, that's the classic thing. You nailed it, the person coming out of the park and landing too far forward and punch fronting, like I did it so many times when I was learning how, and I had totally kind of forgotten about that. So that was like a pretty big learnable for me. And, he had just had a kid too. And you were saying like my training took over, and it was like, I don't remember doing half of it. Like I remember taking on my beacon and all that stuff, but I didn't know you could have so many thoughts go through your brain and still be functioning at the same time. Like it was total flow state.
Yeah, I mean, you could totally see it too. It was just like you're right into it. And it's amazing that when you train for something for so long and you never have to do it, how immediately that training kicks in and it works. But how about after the fact, when you get to a room by yourself and you like look at yourself in the mirror and you're like, how the fuck could I let that happen? Like, what are the thoughts going through your head after the fact when you're by yourself and you realize, well, that's kind of on me?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot easier when he's okay.
Yeah.
That's the thing. If he had died, I mean, that's the thing about it. Even if it's not your fault and you're part of that, you'll never forget that. That's on you for the rest of your life. So these moments are very, very heavy. There's no doubt about it. And the consequence is real. But that's the thing, we're humans. We're not perfect. We're not making the right decisions every time, no matter how good you are at it. So that's the thing of training and going out with people that are dialed like you. It's so important. I mean, you're giving yourself the best chance of success for these scenarios.
And you got to think it's a reality of your job. It's risky and something can go wrong on pretty much every trip in the backcountry. But when you think about it, an injury at a resort might not be a huge deal, but it could be a nightmare in the backcountry. And what's the most intense situation you've had in the backcountry with someone getting hurt or yourself getting hurt where you've had to get them out and it's just like shit is serious at that moment?
You know what? Years ago, I was just actually shooting for the Sherpas with Ingrid Backstrom, and Adma was there, and then Grant Gunderson. And it was like still at the transition time when we were like still using Motorola's and like kind of going into the VHF radios or whatever. But Grant, to his credit, had these VHF radios that he brought along. And literally the night before, he found the heli-ski frequencies and plugged them into his radio. And we were up on this mountain north of Revelstoke doing some shooting. Nothing crazy, like pretty standard. And Ingrid went down and went off a cliff and exploded her patella tendon. And it was about 3 p.m. or something like that. It was pretty cold, like early winter again. And it happened real quick. And luckily, we realized there was a problem. Grant got on the radio like pretty quick, managed to catch Selkirk Tangiers on their last flight out and was like, hey, like we need to rescue, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, yeah, we'll come back up. And what do you guys need? And we're like, we think we're good. And so we hustled, like they went and dropped it off. I think they must have been like 20, 30 minutes or something like that. We had to like build an improvised toboggan and get her down to a helipad. We got Adma down there digging the pad and a bunch of us carrying her down there, stabilizing the knee. And literally the helicopter, we were like pulling up to the pad and the helicopter landed and we like threw her in the back and then she was gone. And like if he had not had that radio, we would have spent a very, very cold night out. I'm sure we would have been all right, but you might have had someone with some bad frostbite on their toes and it definitely wouldn't have been comfortable. That was definitely one of the like, oh shit moments for sure.
Well, that is part of your job, and I'm glad you guys were able to make it out of that safely. But one thing that we haven't talked about, and we've been going for a while, so I've got to get some of this stuff in. I'm going to cut some other stuff out. But one thing that we haven't talked about is you being a tinkerer. It's one of those things that you've been a tinkerer for a long time. Like when you get a brand new boot from your sponsor, is it something where you take that boot right apart and take every piece apart to see what's going on and then adjusting it for your needs?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not on the Hoji level. He's on such another level these days. But yeah, I think it comes with ski touring, to be honest. Like as soon as you ski touring, you're spending so much time walking up, you're thinking about random things. And a lot of times I'm thinking about gear and how it works. I was fortunate enough, did a lot of R&D work with Solomon. So I was always kind of tinkering around, trying to make things better.
With them, it's like the shift binding in the first Mountain Lab boot have your fingerprints all over it, right?
Yeah, totally. The shift, I mean, to be fair with the shift binding, I mean, I wanted that concept, but binding technology is so complicated. I definitely wasn't doing any sort of design work when it comes to that.
Sure.
It was definitely concept. Mountain Lab, yeah, I mean, we pushed to make that boot better, which in the end kind of didn't work or whatever. But yeah, it's just always been a thing of, I mean, the quest. So we started ski touring so long ago, like way before it was cool. We'd always just walk out to the backcountry to go build booters. That's what we did.
So on heavy skis and heavy boots and everything heavy?
Oh, yeah, like race boots with STH bindings and trekkers.
Yep.
Like Alpine Day Wreckers. But then for years, like the first time I went ski touring with Greg Hill and all his buddies when I came to Revelstoke, I did it on trekkers and ghost boots. And they like all showed up and we're like, what the fuck is going on? But like,
they're all on Fritchies and stuff.
Yeah, totally. And I got given Fritchies and tried them out and was like, screw these things. Like I never had a binding that made me ski worse, and that was it. And then at the time, like if you wanted to be on a Dynafit, your boot was just terrible. So we finally got into a place now where it's like you can have a boot that walks quite well and skis quite well as well. But as with anything, there's like total room for improvement. You know, like I take a lot of inspiration from the bike industry and that, like with the enduro bikes. Back in the day, it was like you either had a downhill bike or a cross country bike. Now you have an enduro bike that was way better than your old downhill bike and pedals just as good as your cross country bike. So that's kind of the dream that I'm always going for sure.
And so with Salomon towards the end, were you getting to put as much product input as you wanted? I mean, were they involving you in the conversations, and are you working with engineers, or is it just like you're in Canada, they're in France, and it's a challenge to get you connected with them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to throw them too far under the bus, but I think that's like a big portion of why I switched was I felt like I wasn't being heard anymore. I felt like I didn't have the gear that I needed anymore. So that was like a big inspiration to switch. And also, I feel like I have a lot of value to give in that sense. You know, it's like, okay, you're not like the skier throwing 360s off 40 footers to flat anymore. Where's your value? And for me, it's definitely like design work and testing that stuff is like a super big passion. So that was like a big amount of the reason of the switch.
The switch makes total sense to me because I look at it with Salomon as they have a big stable of athletes, and you were just another number there, it seemed like, towards the end in that stable of athletes. And then, you know, we see the switch to Picture Organic. That makes total sense because it lines up with your environmental story. I'm sure Atomic lines up a little bit with the environmental story as well, but they're going to involve you more in development, and you're going to be able to speak more with their engineers. And it kind of sounds like they make it feel like you're going to have more of a role in development there. And that's the most important thing to you at this point in your career, is having a say in what the product's going to be like, having a say in the environmental story of the product and development of the product. And with Picture, you're totally involved with a brand that's ahead of you maybe in the environmental side. And with Atomic, you can grow with them there and you can help develop the product. I mean, that makes sense for the switch. Is that kind of the reasons behind it?
That's definitely the huge portion about it. So Picture's been super cool. It's been really interesting to learn like all the things that they're doing. And they're just a young, transparent company. You know, it's like they're not perfect, but they're doing some really cool things. And, you know, as someone that's worn Gore-Tex for the last 15 years, it's really nice not to wear Gore-Tex. And to be honest, I've been like super surprised at how good a quality it is and how like comparable it is to Gore-Tex, which I think is awesome to kind of get away from that. And then, yeah, I'm just off, had a big 2-week trip to Austria to go visit Atomic. So a big part of the reason that they brought me on and that I switched was designing a new backland ski. And so that will be out 24-25. And it was pretty wild. I mean, I've been working on it all winter, started testing skis, get down to like the shape and all that. And, you know, came pretty clear after 2 or 3 emails with the ski guys. I was like, holy cow, these guys are like really listening to me. Like this is a big thing. And they're super stoked because I'm like way into it. And so it's been this really positive, really positive experience. Their new backland will be talking about building more sustainable skis. And so they're able to take out 20 to 30% of the carbon compared to the old backland skis. So it's pretty cool to like see this crazy factory that they have over there. And they've been building skis for so long and they're still learning all these tricks and tips of how to build skis better and more sustainably. So that's been really, really interesting to meet all them and see the process.
Being on Atomic, they're part of the same family of brands as Salomon. I think Salomon might be the overarching brand of whatever. I don't even know. But do you work with any of the same people, or are they totally separate?
So now they're totally separate. There was a time when there was some crossover between Aimer. I mean, they still share the bindings, but day to day is like totally separate now.
Okay.
But there's definitely, yeah, I mean, part of the trip over to Austria was a bunch of reps. And I was like, oh, I know a bunch of you guys from Salomon days. So it's kind of funny. I mean, with anything, like the ski industry is super small, people bounce around.
On the sales side, it makes total sense. Why can't the rep bring in a Salomon line of skis and an Atomic line of skis and sell them to the buyer and tell them the differences within the skis? It's not really going to make it that big of a difference, I wouldn't think, to any of the brands or the marketing of the brands.
Yeah. And when I was making the switch, I was very cognizant of I'm like, is this just going to be the same but different,
Yeah.
But just talking to them, they're a totally different company. It's run totally different. Yeah, they couldn't be more different, even though they're run by the same thing. The really cool part about Atomic, I think, is they have their factory in Altamark. It's making 500,000 skis a year. It's run off biomass. The headquarters are there. The shipping's there. Like their control, that was one of my first questions this fall. Like when I was talking to them, I was like, are you guys worried about this like energy crisis in Europe? And they're like, oh no, well, we run the place on biomass. And you're like, oh, well, that was a good move, and they did that years ago. So they're like just starting to talk about the sustainability story, but they've been doing a lot of it already. It felt like it's a more of a natural way of things in Austria. It's very progressive in that sense, is kind of the impression I got.
Nice. Well, it sounds like you're in the right place. And at this point, we're going to go into the last part of this podcast before Inappropriate Questions again. And we're going to talk about where you're planting your seed. You're dating Greg Hill's sister. She was into farming. And when the pandemic hits, it made it the perfect time for you to get into farming as well, right? Is that kind of how that went?
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic was the catalyst for sure. We'd been we say that we were looking for farmland in BC, but it was kind of just an excuse to like recreate all summer and pretend, every town we'd stop in, we'd look at real estate and whatever. But that was largely because we thought we were priced out of Revelstoke. We didn't think we could afford it here, what we wanted. And then sure enough, the pandemic hit. We're like, why the fuck are we not farming? Like, we've been talking about this for so long. We need to do it. And we started on leased land the first year, which was great. It solidified that we wanted to do this, that we worked well together, that there was a market. And the biggest thing is we had our dream property of what we wanted to have. And we realized we didn't need that to be successful at farming. And so right at the end of the year, a little chunk of land right in Revelstoke came up and we were able to purchase it. And so, yeah, we're about to go into season 3 on this land, which is season 4 of farming for us. So yeah, it's been a pretty wild ride. Definitely have learned a lot about a lot of different things. Some of it has to do with farming. Some of it just has to do with business. But yeah, it's been really rewarding and really challenging, but really fun at the end of the day.
With farming, I kind of look at it like you're a weed dealer and grower. It's like you grow your greens, then you take it to the dispensary, aka the farmer's market, and you sell your bags. What's the average sale price at one of your farmer's markets for your stuff? I mean, like, are you selling a bag of greens for $10?
Yeah, so I mean, I think these days you probably make more money on greens than you do on weed. Yeah, so we sell greens. What do? We do wholesale $11 a pound, and then just like standard is $14 a pound. So most of the restaurants in Revelstoke are clients, so we're delivering to them twice a week, primarily greens, and then as the season progresses, whatever we have. And then we do the farmer's market, and then we have a little like honor system farm stand right out front of our house, and it's on a pretty busy road where everyone goes mountain biking. So that's been super popular, people stopping by and just putting cash.
Only in Canada, man, the honor system.
It's super cool. It's like we started it the first year, we were just like hustling, trying to like sell your product. Cause that's the thing. You have this product and then it's all perishable. So once you have it, you got to like hustle it out of there before it goes bad.
Yeah. You're just burning money if you don't.
Yeah, totally. Like once it's out of the field, it's like, you got to sell it. So the farm stand has been really good for that. People love it. I think it kind of gives people a little stoke on humanity that they can be trusted. We're all adults here, and they can do math and put it in the box, and they're just trusted to be their own. And I think it's a good thing to trust more people.
In Canada, if I were to do any kind of honor system here, I do honor systems on Halloween, and my candy is gone in like 6 minutes, it seems like. I'll put a bowl out there, and it's like, in America, we aren't as nice and considerate as Canadians. But you know that already. I mean, shit, you're Canadian. You have to know that.
Yeah, fair enough, yeah.
But when I think about it, skiing's probably always going to be more important than farming to you because it's always been your passion. But does farming become more important to skiing when it comes to income? Like, is farming eventually going to be the long-term plans of paying all your bills? Is you're going to be a farmer?
So that was kind of like the other side angle on starting the farm is like, I think I'm getting older. I wanted like another revenue stream. And what I really wanted to do is like have a good look at skiing without it being how I pay my mortgage and how I pay my bills. And so after the second year, we had a really good second year. And I was like, we're still investing money, but I'm like, oh, this is like something we can make money at. And so that whole season, the whole next season, I just like spent it out there and really thought about what did I wanted to do with skiing. Like, do I want to be a pro skier? Do I want to get into guiding? What do I want to do? And what became really obvious to me is like, one, I still have a few things that I would quite like to do. Two, I really want to work on product. And three, I love film skiing. I love working with other professionals. I love the teamwork environment. And I really like, when you go skiing with your buddies and you're going ski touring, it's like you're so rarely look at a zone and like really pick it apart and then ski it how you want to ski it. You kind of glance at it and you're like, oh, maybe we should ski over there. But then your other buddy's like, oh, no, I want to ski over there. And then you've never really looked at the lines. And so you just can't like ski it how you want to ski it. Whereas like when you're ski filming, you get to the bottom, you take photos, you like have your binoculars out, you're studying it, and then you're ski touring up beside it, looking at it again. And by the time you get to the top, you know exactly where you're going to make each turn and how you're going to execute that line. And when you nail those lines, it's the funnest type of skiing because you have no hesitation. You're airing to those like trannies and all that. And so I really enjoy that aspect of skiing. So yeah, to answer the original question, the farm has definitely turned into a bit bigger of a beast than maybe we thought it would.
That's a good problem to have, though.
Yeah, totally. It was definitely one of those things you're like, oh yeah, I'll like farm in the summer and then I'll ski in the winter. It's perfect. But it turns out there's like quite a bit of planning that goes into the winter at wintertime to execute in the summer.
I can't even imagine all the stuff that you have to worry about. So you're kind of a snow farmer in the winter and you're a farmer the rest of the year and also a farmer during the winter as well. And I'd ask what the future holds, but I think I already know. Farming, skiing, and being a dad. But your immediate future is doing another round of inappropriate questions. And instead of giving you a long intro here like I usually do every single week, I'm going to cut into the intro I did with Greg Hill because I'm kind of lazy. So I'm going to have you sit back and wait for the intro that I've got for Greg Hill right now as we jump into inappropriate questions.
Perfect.
Now is the time in the podcast that we jump into inappropriate questions. And as you know from last week, I get someone that you know to ask 3 questions and they can be anything. Last week, I was able to get the godfather of the twin tip movement, Mike Douglas, to ask some questions, and they were not inappropriate at all. In fact, I had to make one of those questions inappropriate by saying, what did Greg Hill say when he found out that you were sleeping with his sister? And that's just me being inappropriate to Greg Hill right now, who's going to be asking you 3 inappropriate questions. So Greg, can you jump into question number 1?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you might have already asked one of them, but Chris, I guess for me, it's kind of odd because we had this relationship. We were called Hillbins. We were filming, adventuring. And I really want to know if the whole relationship was fake and you were just using me to get to my sister. Was it a fake relationship? Was Hillbins really based off nothing but your horniness?
Yeah, I mean, I can't answer this truthfully because I don't think he's ready for the real answer yet. No, I mean, I wish I could say it was pre-planned like that, but it wasn't pre-planned. I mean, that year, I spent a lot of time with Greg, and then a bunch of stuff happened. And then all of a sudden, I was with his sister, who now own a farm and a house and
a child,
have a kid and 2 cats. So it's safe to say we're pretty much family at this point. But it's been pretty interesting to meet Greg's family because he wasn't introduced me to his family, but I'd certainly have through his sister. So it explains a lot about how Greg turned out anyways.
All right, well, we will leave that one at that. So it's safe to say you're still friends with Greg Hill.
Safe to say, yeah.
It wasn't just to get his sister and then you're out.
No. It was just part of it.
All right. Now let's jump into his second inappropriate question.
That leads me right into my second question, which is like right early on when you were starting to sleep with my sister. I remember chatting to her and she kind of said you weren't really that good in bed. And I was wondering if you think that's changed since then.
So yeah, your brother-in-law is asking you if you've gotten better at sex with his sister. Super weird.
I mean, that's just Greg in a nutshell. Like, there's nothing offside in his family topics. Well, I mean, I'm going to be the first one to admit that I'm probably not that good. But she's quite good. And what I make up in lack of skill, I really put that effort in. That's the key. And it seems to work.
All right, so he tries hard.
Yeah, she makes me feel like I'm good at it anyway, so.
That's all that matters is the way that you feel about it. I mean, if she makes you feel that you're good, you're the best. So that's great. And Greg can know that you're totally satisfying his sister in a way no other man could ever do before. So that's so cool to know. Now we'll jump into his last inappropriate question.
Chris, as a young kid, I used to read Penthouse letters a lot. And I was wondering if you have any family members that have written something like Penthouse letters.
Well, I'm pretty sure what he's referring to. My mother just wrote her memoir, and most of my friends got that book for Christmas this year, courtesy of myself. And it goes in fairly in depth into her and my father's first time consummating, or before their marriage, I guess. So I'm assuming that's what he's talking to. I don't know any family members that have been actually writing to Penthouse.
Nope, that's exactly what he's talking about. We were just kind of setting it up to see if you would sell your mom out with this or not. And it's funny that she would describe that in the book, and then you would give the book out to people for Christmas, because you had to know that if they actually read it, which I'm sure half the people did, half the people didn't, that they were going to come back and be like, dude, that was some pretty racy stuff your mom was saying right there.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, all of Greg's family got it, so they all know that side of it. But, I mean, I can't say I particularly enjoyed reading about her first time with my father. But at the same time, I really respect the, honesty there. And she's British, so such a different upbringing. And, I think I've lived a pretty cool life, but their life is way cooler than anything I ever did, traveling around Afghanistan in the 70s and all these crazy adventures. So I think it was a good read for a lot of people.
I think Greg also wants you to kind of write your memoir later on in life and describe your sex life with his sister so he can read it and his family can read it at some point too. So maybe something to keep in the back of your head.
Yeah. No, I never thought of it. Maybe I'll just start writing letters to him.
He'd love that. I think that's what he really wanted.
Yeah, their family's definitely letter writers, so it would fit right into the motif.
All right, so that is Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast, and it's been a fun two-parter. And while I've known about you forever, I never really dove deep into the Chris Rubens brand, and I really have no idea why. I mean, I watched all of your stuff at least once, and I never really decided to look and find out more about you. And maybe it's because you're Canadian, maybe it's because you weren't marketed with a slick marketing campaign, and I never really dove into the layers because of that. Who knows? But your story's a cool one, purely photo and film based, and while you've had a lot of product input, for the most part, it seems like you just focus on skiing and filming, and you're not worried about any of the ego stuff. And sure, you've had the ego moments. You've had your film covers, you've had your movie parts, but they've never made you be like, look at me, I'm this badass. It's just kind of like you just keep focusing on putting out content every year, and that's worked for over 20 years, and it's going to be interesting to see how your new brands use you and how you develop products with them and tell their stories. So I'm excited to see that, and I thank you for your time, man.
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, it's been fun, and I mean, it all comes down to just loving skiing. That's the fun part about it, and skiing's pretty damn fun. And yeah, thanks for doing so much research. It was a really interesting conversation, this two-parter, so I hope everyone enjoys it.
So that was time with Chris Rubens, and if you heard my outro last week, well, it sure sounded like I have a man crush on Chris. And the reason why is that for years, all I've heard about Chris is how great of a guy he is. Then I get him on the podcast, and it's refreshing to hear how transparent and how nice he is. All those rumors are true. There's no attitude, no ego, and based off his skiing, he could have all of that, but he doesn't. He's just a nice Canadian dude who gets rad on his skis, cares about his community and environment, and is living the pro ski life that most people dream of. That's the show. Now it's time for the review of the week, and it's a 5-star review that comes from Mooner Madness, and the review is titled, "Wow, you really did your research." Here's the review. I look forward to Monday morning every week for one reason only, and that reason is the Powell Movement. This podcast takes a deep dive into the lives of action sports athletes and executives from every sport imaginable. One week it's a pro skier, next it's a mountain biker, followed by an inline skater, then back to snow we go. And every episode is just as good, if not better than the last. Most of the time these days, it's someone that I'm not even familiar with, and that doesn't matter one bit. As someone who spent their whole youth chasing down rogue bike trails and getting kicked out of school campuses for skating handrails, but now has a boring 8-to-5 career, it helps keep my stoke level high each week. My favorite thing is that Mike really goes the extra mile in his research leading up to the podcast, and guests are always blown away by it. For anyone contemplating taking the TPM plunge, Mike always brings good energy and thought-provoking conversation to the table, and I'm thankful for the content this podcast provides. You would be too. Well, Mooner Madness, thank you so much for that review. It is very flattering, and it speaks to the thing that I love doing most, and that is research. Actually, when I started this thing, I thought I was going to get by with my sense of humor, and research would be secondary, but really, no one cares about my sense of humor. They care about my research, and that has made me care so much more about it. I realize I don't have to be funny at all. I just have to get the information that you guys want to hear out, and sometimes it's comical, but for the most part, it is me just trying to peel the layers back, get that information for you, and I'm glad that you recognize that, Mooner Madness. And for me reading your review on the podcast, I am going to send you a limited edition, totally custom Powell Movement puffin drinkware. This is like the cutest koozie ever built. If anybody else would like to get their hands on one of these puffins, this is what you need to do. You need to review me wherever you listen. And if you just want to review on social media and tag me, that's great as well. If I read your review or social post on the podcast, that means that you are eligible for that custom puffin. Thank you. That's greatly appreciated. Thank you also for listening. And the last thing I'm going to ask of you is to please support the brands that make the podcast happen. They are Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Elon Skis, Rollerblade, Stanley, and Best Day Brewing. Have a great week, everyone.